Hello everybody, you're very welcome indeed to the 2012 TASC annual lecture. And thanks indeed for struggling through another lovely Irish summer day to get here today, particularly grim. My name is Nat O'Connor and I'm the director of TASC. And I'm very pleased this evening to introduce our speaker, who's Father Peter McVerry. And I'm glad to have the opportunity to say a few opening remarks to introduce some aspects of Peter McVerry's work and how it relates to the work that TASC does. And TASC, as you know, is an independent progressive think tank. We're dedicated to promoting equality, democracy and sustainability in Ireland. And we do this through putting out evidence-based policy recommendations. And you can see more about our work on our website, www.tasknet.ie. And we're an independent charity, and we rely on private donations, such as from yourselves tonight, and you'll see the small envelopes on your seats, which helps keep us going and supports our work. And TASC's vision is of an Irish society with equality and social justice for all, based on a sustainable economy, accountable government, and strong public engagement. And there's no better man to talk about social justice for all than Peter McVerry. Of course, most of you know who Peter McVerry is. You could hardly have failed to notice his passionate and challenging commentary on our society for the last 30-odd years. And the starting point for Peter's work was the hostel he opened in 1974 for boys who were homeless. And from this, he identified the particular needs of young men, particularly those over the age of 18, who can suddenly be left adrift from child and youth supports they may have relied on. And Peter McVerry's mission has particularly focused on addressing the needs of young men facing homelessness and battling issues of mental health and drug addiction. And this work began as a 3-bed flat for homeless youngsters and has grown into the Peter McVerry Trust, employing 60 people with 3 hostels, a drug detox centre, 2 drug-free aftercare houses, a drop-in centre, a drug stabilisation programme, and 12 apartments, primarily for people with mental health issues. And you can find out more about how you can support their work at www.pmvtrust.ie. And I have a particular interest in homelessness. I spent 3.5 years working as a researcher in the Homeless Agency. And I know that the Peter McVerry Trust works in close cooperation with the agency, which has changed its name but not its purpose, and is now called the Dublin Region Homeless Executive. He supported their work in the coordination of services and in improving quality of services. He's also supported the housing first approach. Putting people into a home and then bringing the services to them makes far more sense and is much cheaper and more effective. But he has rightly also been a strong critic of systematic failures, such as the lack of a joined-up approach to tackling homelessness in mainstream housing and healthcare services. And he's particularly focused on our underfunding of mental health and addiction services. Of course, we need all these services to work together to deal holistically with people's needs, which are often rooted in childhood traumas. And the description of the Peter McVerry Trust is very straightforward. The Trust supports young homeless people to break the cycle of homelessness and move towards independent living through the provision of a continuum of care services. I think a key phrase in there is break the cycle. Peter McVerry's work has been very clearly grounded in an understanding that people's lives are massively shaped by where they are born, the environment where they're brought up, and the supports and opportunities that they are able to access in their life. And people who are born into poverty and disadvantage are more likely to be poor. And the children of those who are struggling with mental health problems and addiction are highly likely to bear the scars of that experience and are more likely to become drug addicted or risk homelessness themselves. But the cycle of poverty and homelessness is not inevitable. It's a product. It's a product of our social systems, our public services, and how we choose to organise the economy. And these systems, such as the housing market, can be changed. So, for example, can we really eliminate homelessness? In 2008, there were nearly 2,500 adults counted as homeless in the Greater Dublin area as part of the triannual housing needs assessment. And it sounds like a manageable proposition to find enough houses and apartments for 2,500 adults from NAMA and other sources. Now, of course, we would still need to make sure that our mental health services and other supports are in place to support people in their new homes, but it still seems very doable. And it is doable, although it's not as simple as that. Homelessness is like the tip of an iceberg, and if you can imagine an iceberg turning in the water, you can only ever see a small amount of it at any one time, but you're seeing different edges of it each time. So in homelessness, there may be 2,500 adults in Dublin who are homeless at any one time, but if you compare this year with last year, with next year, you'll find there's different names and faces in the 2,500. In other words, the people who are homeless at any one time are the result of a cycle or a process or a system, rather than simply being a small group of people in extreme need. So an important part of Peter McVerry's work, and I think there's links there with TASC's work, is to seek change in our social and economic systems to break the cycle. And Peter often points out that we have not organised our services to address those with the greatest needs. For example, just 28 detox beds for 15,000 heroin users. And one of his books is titled "The Meaning is in the Shadows," looks at the structural issues that affect the lives of people living in the margins. But what should guide us as we seek to change our public services and economic system? Peter McVerry's talk tonight is titled "Inequality, a Failure of Vision and Values." And Peter's often spoken about the values that motivate him. Unsurprisingly, his vision is rooted in his life as a Jesuit priest and his understanding of God and Jesus. His latest book is called "Jesus, Social Revolutionary," and it challenges Christian churches to make social justice central to all they say and do. And in speaking about the current Eucharistic Congress, Peter has called upon the Church to eliminate homelessness, poverty and hopelessness. He's spoken about Jesus' message of a self-sacrificing love as central to his vision. And it's a vision which is squarely rooted in the here and now. It's about how we, in our society, need to take action to lift the traumas off young people's shoulders. And he's argued that social justice is a practical thing, not about theory or good aspirations. It's a practical consequence of acknowledging the dignity of every human being. And this is not about trying to get us to heaven, but about forming a community here where we live together in justice and fairness. And Peter has argued this involves two characteristics. One is a community of radical solidarity, where everybody shares everything they have and are for the sake of those in need in the community. And secondly, it's a community of radical social inclusion, where everybody is welcome and everybody is valued. And Peter has argued that this was Jesus' vision for the world. Imagine we all lived together and ensured everybody's needs was met. And this is a vision of the world that can be, and is, readily shared by many people who don't come from a religious perspective. It recognises solidarity as a value that our society today urgently needs to create a just world without poverty or exclusion. And TASC has done some work on what we call our vision of a flourishing society, which will be launching on the 29th of June. Michael D. Higgins will be launching that here at 11 a.m. So you may think that I've covered a lot of what Peter McVerry might have to say to you this evening, but I can assure you I've only scratched the surface of his analysis, criticism and vision for Ireland. I mean, his concerns include many other issues: mental health and addiction, prison reform and more. And he's not shied away from some of the most challenging issues facing our society, such as what are we as a society going to do to help the children of parents who are overwhelmed by drug addiction. But Peter McVerry often says in his work that he's angry. And I'll let him tell you himself why he is angry and how he directs his anger. And will you please join me in welcoming tonight's speaker, Father Peter McVerry.
Well, good evening, everybody. When I was asked to give this talk, I should have said no. But you'll say yes to anything that's a couple of months away. And so as it gets closer, you begin to say, what did I let myself in for? So I'm not an academic, and I'm not an economist, as will very quickly become apparent. I can only share with you some reflections arising from my work with homeless young people. One of the effects of working with homeless people has been, as Nat said, to make me angry. And I'm glad to be angry. And I always say when I lose my anger, I'll be no use to them. So it's from that angry perspective then that I share these few thoughts. I received an email recently from a lady who's living in private rented accommodation. She'd got a letter from the community welfare officer informing her that her rent supplement was being reduced from €340 a month to €250 a month. She was told to negotiate a rent reduction with the landlord. And if the landlord was not willing to reduce her rent, she had 13 weeks to get out and find accommodation at that rate. She would not be allowed to pay the balance from her own resources, even if she could have afforded it. But failure to find accommodation at the lower rate would result in her rent supplement being discontinued altogether. Now, her rent supplement has already been reduced twice in recent years, the most recent reduction being in January of this year. And she has already negotiated with considerable difficulty a reduction in rent with her landlord to compensate. She is very clear that her landlord will not reduce the rent any further. She has lived in this accommodation for 5 years, and it has become her home. Since she got the letter, she has been looking around for cheaper accommodation in the neighbourhood, but cannot find any. The situation is causing her considerable mental distress. She is staring homelessness in the face. Now, why would the Department of Social Protection take such a course of action? It is, of course, trying to save money by reducing the cost of renting. Since 40% of rental accommodation is dependent on a rent supplement, they hope to force rents down and cite some very disputable evidence that rents are currently above market rates. However, the consequences of this policy will potentially make hundreds of people homeless and condemn the rest to living in hovels that are unfit for human habitation. Another story. Patrick's 38 and has been unemployed all his life. Recently, the Department of Social Protection cut his job seekers allowance by €44 because he failed to attend an interview at which his skills and qualifications would be reviewed in an effort to assist him to find work. He was being penalised for not making an effort to escape unemployment. He confirms for many the stereotypical image of welfare spongers, too lazy to work, too comfortable on welfare. Now, there are 436,700 people in this country at the moment out of work. Many of them third-level graduates, most of them with at least a leaving cert. Patrick left school when he was 14. His literacy level is low. He has no skills or qualifications. He has a criminal record from his earlier years. He's on a methadone program and has to attend his methadone clinic every day, which incidentally, due to cutbacks, is no longer open in the evening. Patrick's chances of getting a job in this recession are nil. Yet he's expected to keep looking for a job, which, even if it did exist, he has no hope of getting, or he's going to be punished for not doing so. Suppose Patrick actually looks for work. He has very low self-esteem. He feels that his life has always been a failure. He failed to finish school. He failed to learn to read and write properly. He ended up in prison. He failed to ever get a job. His few attempts to get a job inevitably ended again in failure. All Patrick's attempts to find a job are simply reinforcing his sense of failure. The Department of Social Protection, in its demand that Patrick keep looking for a job, is only damaging Patrick even further. Patrick also suffers from depression. This is related to childhood traumas, which have never healed. He often lies in bed for days on end, too depressed to get up. Now, even if he could get a job, no employer would keep him on. Ironically, in all the years of the Celtic Tiger, when unskilled jobs were available, especially in the construction industry, the Department of Social Protection never asked Patrick to attend an interview to see how they could help him to get employment. Patrick would have been delighted if somebody could have helped him get a job. Now that there are few jobs available and hundreds of thousands of well-qualified people looking for them, Patrick is being pressurized to attend what will almost certainly be a useless interview. This crackdown on people who are unemployed is not primarily to help people get a job. It appears designed to punish people for being unemployed. Welfare payments are seen as a waste of valuable resources on people who are unproductive in the economy. The government's action plan for jobs hopes over the next 5 years to reduce the number of people who are unemployed by 100,000. 436,700 people at least will be competing for those jobs or training places. Even if all those jobs and training places materialise, a huge if, there will still be 336,700 people unemployed. It would actually make more sense if those who chose not to compete for those jobs, thus giving others a better chance of securing them, were to be rewarded for opting out, not punished. Why ask everyone to chase jobs when we know that more than 3 out of 4 cannot succeed? Do those who make such policies understand the consequences of their policies, or do they simply not care? I believe the people who make such policies are usually good, caring, compassionate people who simply live in a totally different world, unaware of the real consequences of their decisions. And so to a parable. John lives in the top floor, flat on the top floor of a house. 8 o'clock in the morning, and he pulls the curtains. The sun shines in. He looks out the window at the mountains in the distance rolling down to the sea. He sees the ships coming in and out of the harbour and the yachts on the sea. The mountains are sometimes covered in snow, at other times it's a luscious sea of green. The sun shows the scene in all its beauty. John says, it's a beautiful day. It's great to be alive. However, Jim lives in the basement flat of the same building. 8 o'clock in the morning, he pulls the curtains. Nothing happens. The sun cannot get in. He looks out the window, and all he sees is the whitewashed wall of the outside toilet. He can't see the mountains. He can't see the sea or the yachts or the sun. He doesn't know what sort of day it is. Here you have two people looking out of the same house at the same time of the same day into the same back garden. But they have two totally different views. There is a view from the top and a view from the bottom. Both views are equally valid, though one is admittedly much nicer than the other. And now to the reality. John is a managing director of a large company. He has a good pensionable salary with regular bonuses and share options. He works very hard, often having to travel abroad to attend meetings and frequently working till late in the evening. He lives in a fine house in a very fashionable neighbourhood on the south side. His children went to the same fee-paying school as he did and are planning to follow in their father's footsteps when they graduate from college. Old in VHI. John takes his family on holidays twice a year. If you ask John what does he think of the structures of Irish society, he would be fulsome in their praise. The educational system was very good to him. It gave him an excellent education, allowing him to compete with the best of his international peers, and it's now doing the same for his children. The housing opportunities open to him were excellent. He has a lovely house in a lovely area, and when his children are grown up and have moved on, he can sell the house and buy a nice little bungalow for himself and his wife in another nice little area. The job market was very supportive. He had a very good college degree, and it was only a matter of choosing which of the jobs he was offered. At some point in the future, he would probably seek a new career or new challenges. And with his qualifications and experience, there will be no difficulty in finding a suitably rewarding and satisfying position in another company. The health service is excellent. Ready access to the family GP or to consultants, to inpatient hospital treatment or to surgery. However, Jim is unemployed. He had been a manual worker on the docks, but with the growth of technology, he was no longer needed. He's too old now to retrain, and there are few manual jobs left anyway for which he could apply. He lives in a flat in a local authority complex. His flat is beautiful, but the stairwells and the common balconies are covered in graffiti and smell of urine. His neighbours are alcoholics and frequently have fierce drunken rows in the middle of the night, which keeps Jim and his family awake. Drug dealing goes on all day and most of the night, and he can see it happening from his window. He's scared that his children will end up taking drugs. He'd love to get out of there, but he doesn't have enough points to get a house of his own. His children left school when they were 15. They wanted the money they could make in the local supermarket, as their father was unable to give them much from his dole money. He couldn't persuade them to stay on in school. They had told him they'd never get a decent job anyway, as long as they were living in this estate, so they may as well take now what they can get. If you ask Jim what does he think of the structures of Irish society, you'll get a very different reply to John's. The educational system taught him to read and write, but otherwise it was of no benefit to him. Few children in his neighbourhood completed second-level education, and nobody he knew had ever gone to college. The housing system is awful. He is stuck in a flat which he doesn't want to live, but there's a dire shortage of local authority accommodation and long waiting lists. The job market has collapsed. He hasn't worked for 10 years, and he's given up hoping that he will ever work again. His children are stuck in dead-end jobs that won't last. The health service is appalling. Long waiting lists to see consultants or to have non-emergency operations. Now, both John and Jim live in the same country, have gone through the same educational system, competed in the same labour market. But they have two totally different views of Irish society. There is a view from the top and a view from the bottom. Both views are equally valid, but that in itself is not the problem. The problem arises because all the decisions in our society are made by those with the view from the top. And they have no understanding of the experiences of those at the bottom. Oh, they know the views of those at the bottom. They have read reports. They have visited, briefly, the places they live in. They have a concept of what their views are, but they have no understanding of their experiences. Equally, those homeless people that I work with have no understanding of the views and experiences of those who are at the top. They're earning $100,000 a year, going on foreign holidays, driving BMWs. These homeless people come into me looking for their bus fare to get home. Otherwise, they have to walk. There are two different worlds, side by side, but light years apart. One year when I was going on holidays, I jokingly told some homeless people that I was going to Skerries for 2 weeks. What I found sad is that some of them actually believed me. No disrespect to the people of Skerries, but I wouldn't dream of going to Skerries for a holiday. But for some homeless people, going on holidays to Skerries is a dream that will probably never come true. Two different worlds, both important, both interlinked, but light years apart. Now, if we go back to the parable, imagine the back of the house in which John and Jim live is a large garden. It's completely unkempt. The grass is 3 feet long. The weeds cannot believe their luck. Indeed, there are probably some new, previously unknown species of weeds growing in the garden. There's rubbish piled high in the corner, and the railings that surround the garden are rusted and broken. Imagine that John's the owner of the house, and he lives in a lovely flat at the top. John has some money saved, and he's wondering what he'll do with it to improve the house. It's perfectly rational to decide that the back garden is such an eyesore that he'll have to do something about it. It completely spoils his view from the window. So he cleans up the garden, employs a landscape gardener, replaces the fence, builds a lovely fountain in the middle, plants beautiful flowers throughout the garden. This investment not only makes it much more attractive to live at the top of the house, but it undoubtedly increases the value of the house. Everyone who visits John compliments him on his wise decision. However, the beautifully restored garden is irrelevant to Jim in the basement flat. He has no view of the garden. He doesn't even have a door to give him access to the garden. Jim had suggested to John that he relocate the outside toilet over to the side of the garden. This would have given Jim a lovely view of the garden. But John did not think that was a priority. It would have been expensive to do. And anyway, the toilet was working perfectly well where it was. However, in response to Jim's complaint, he did, it is true, paint the toilet wall a beautiful sky blue. John didn't have to live in the basement. He had no feeling for how the toilet wall was impacting on the quality of Jim's view. Of course, Jim had tried to explain it to John, but John wasn't impressed. Anyway, what did Jim expect for €120 a week? A penthouse suite? Now, John had another thought. Now that the value of the house was increased, he was entitled to increase the rent paid by the tenants. But Jim was unable to afford this increase. John told him he had to leave. That was just market reality. John was a businessman, not a social worker. Sentimentality reduces your bank balance like nothing else. So John's very reasonable decision to improve the back garden was to Jim in the basement, at best irrelevant, at worst it led to him becoming homeless. And so back to reality. John knows that demolishing the toilet wall would improve Jim's view. The cost is too much. It's too inconvenient. To John, Jim is being very unreasonable. Jim took the flat, knowing the toilet was there. The view from the window is no big deal, says John, not realizing that it was the view from his window that prompted him to clean up the garden. The effects of power depend on the relationship between the person who has power and the groups who are affected by the use of that power. Could afford and put the extra income into the demolition of the toilet. John's friendship with Jim would have given him not only a concept of how much the toilet meant to Jim, but also a feel or understanding of what it means to him. And because of his relationship to Jim, he would have wanted to do something about it. The sort of society we build depends on the decisions that some people make. Those who make the decisions in our society are almost always middle class, comfortably off, and well educated. They understand the culture from which they come, the view from the top. Decision makers have inevitably a stronger affinity with some groups than with others. And so the concerns of those groups will be much more easily understood and felt than the concerns of others. Good people make bad decisions, not because of a defect in moral values, but because of a defect in vision, because they are unaware. They have little or no understanding of the problems, feelings, and struggles of those at the bottom of society. To build a just society, decision makers need to reach out, to understand, to befriend, to listen to the views, feelings and concerns of those who are on the margins. They have to spend much more time in shelters for the homeless, refuges for women suffering domestic violence, the overcrowded homes of some of those on local authority waiting lists, in the drug clinics and on the streets with mothers of children with special needs, with those dependent on public health services, with those on low incomes unable to qualify for medical cards. Only then will they begin to see and understand the view from the bottom, to understand the experiences and feelings of those who have that view. Why in Ireland in 2012 do blighted, neglected estates such as Moyross, South Hill or Dolphin's Barn continue to exist, whereas people continue to live in intolerable conditions? Of course, those who make the decisions have some concept of the conditions that exist in these estates, but they don't live there. They don't spend time there. They are unaffected by the conditions of life there. I look with anger at the different treatment of bondholders and homeless people. A political decision was made that unidentified and apparently unidentifiable bondholders had to be paid no matter the cost. And so it happened. Why could we not have made a political decision to eliminate homelessness or blighted housing estates, no matter the cost? It's not rocket science. The problem of homelessness is not so complicated that we cannot identify or find a solution. But politicians understand the world of finance and are comfortable in that world, whereas the world of homelessness is a different world, right beside us, amongst us, but light years apart. The application of theoretical principles will never on its own produce a just society. The study of ethics may well produce a body of principles which are the result of rational thought, but the soul of ethics is a sense of solidarity. Ethical principles may be reasonable from a certain point of view. Treat slaves with kindness might have seemed a reasonable ethical principle to slave owners, but I'm not sure the slaves would have agreed. What appears to be a natural, reasonable thing to do depends on the view that you have. And it is our solidarity with others which challenges our own conditioned views. The view of those who are marginalised and excluded in Irish society does not have any greater validity than the view from the top, but it does have priority, precisely because it is the view of those who have been excluded. If building a just society depends on the decisions that some people make, then reaching out across the divide to hear, respect, understand how the other side live and feel and think and value and suffer is an essential requisite to building a just society. However, the problems obviously go much deeper. Our lives are dominated, even controlled, by the economic system in which we are immersed. This economic system has taken our deepest desires as human beings and manipulated them to consolidate and promote the economic system itself. It imposes values on us which ensures the marginalization and exclusion of some in society and provides the justification for keeping them marginalized for those who want it. I couldn't bring myself to vote yes in the recent referendum. To have voted yes seemed to me to be a vote of confidence in the current system, and I felt unable to do that. And I was afraid to vote no, for fear that Ireland might be excluded from the very system that I disagree with. So what could I do? I had to spoil my vote. As I say, I'm not an economist, but from my perspective, the current economic model in which we are immersed is a fundamentally unjust economic system. In 1996, when the Celtic Tiger was just beginning, there were 2,500 homeless people in Ireland. In 2008, when the Celtic Tiger was just finishing, there were 5,000 homeless people in Ireland. During those years, when our government had more money than it knew what to do with, the number of homeless people doubled. Why? Basically, the escalating cost of housing pushed up the cost of renting. A flat that had cost £30 a week in 1996 would cost €130 a week in 2008. Some already wealthy people got even wealthier from building or investing in houses, while at the same time, and for exactly the same reason, homeless people were priced out of the market into homelessness. The stress caused to that lady on the rent supplement scheme system, the pain that is imposed on so many ordinary people who had nothing to do with the economic crisis in which we find ourselves, while those wealthy bankers, developers and politicians who are primarily responsible for the crisis are largely untouchable, is grossly unfair. We are told that bondholders have to be paid and that we have no choice in the matter, thereby imposing enormous hardship on those who are losing their jobs and sometimes their homes, on those on social welfare, on those who are sick, on those with special needs, the elderly and those with disabilities. We are told that we cannot impose extra taxes on the rich, as they will simply leave the country and will get nothing off them. This economic model in which we are immersed seems to me to be fundamentally unjust because it benefits primarily those countries, companies and individuals who are wealthy, and to define the parameters within which decisions can be made. While I want to focus on the values which this economic system has imposed on us, I would like to first make two observations. First, that economic model seems to me to be incapable, both at home and globally, of giving everyone a decent standard of living. Thank you. As I say, during the Celtic Tiger years, the number of homeless people doubled. The number of households on social housing waiting lists more than doubled, from 27,400 in 1996 to 56,249 in 2008. Our prisons became more overcrowded than ever in the history of the state. 1 in 9 children still remained in consistent poverty in 2008, and thousands of poor families lived in slum conditions in private rented accommodation which was unfit for human habitation. And globally, the economic model that we have known has given millions of us in the Western world a standard of living which is beyond the dream of those 1 billion people on our planet who live on the edge of destitution. But this economic model cannot, as it did for us, lift them out of their poverty without destroying our planet with greenhouse gases and polluting our water sources to the point of being unusable. And secondly, that economic model was unsustainable. This economic model is based on a belief in infinite growth capitalism. The myth that a consumption-led economy can keep on growing indefinitely. We have to keep spending, or economic growth will shudder to a halt. An unending consumption-led capitalism must either implode or destroy the planet. The values inherent in this economic model also seem to me to be flawed. This economic model has, as its primary objective, the pursuit of maximum profit for one sector in the economy, namely shareholders in the banking and corporate business world. Everyone else is simply a means to that end. Employees have no value in themselves. Their value is dependent on their ability to create profits for shareholders. When they are no longer necessary, example, replaced by technology or considered too expensive, then the employees are dispensable. as per Irish Ferries, Hibernian, Dell and others, most recently Hewlett-Packard, whose shares went up 11% the day after they announced the laying off of 20,000 workers worldwide. Customers have any value beyond making profits for the shareholders. Some low-cost airlines show almost contempt for their passengers, except insofar as they generate money for the company. In that pursuit of maximum profits for shareholders, the key stakeholders pursue for themselves the goal of maximum personal gain, as evidenced by revelations of obscene salaries, bonuses, expenses, pensions, golden parachutes, and exceptional payments. Communism sought to remedy legitimate grievances at the way society was organized and at the economic model which underpins society. But its failure to respect the value of each individual in society, seeing them only as a cog in a collective machine, eventually led to the political crisis which caused communism to implode. Our economic system has the same fundamental flaw. Driven by the desire to benefit one sector of the population and devaluing everyone else in the process, it too fails to respect the value of each individual in society, seeing them only as a source of profits for shareholders. Our lives then are largely determined by the aspirations and economic control of a few, the more powerful and affluent, who single-mindedly pursue profit. Governments such as ours must dance to their tune. For example, this economic model insists that we keep international investors happy. If they're unhappy with their investment in Ireland, or they feel that the climate is hostile to them, they'll go somewhere else. Then economic growth will go into reverse. People will lose their jobs, the poor will become even poorer, and health and education services will be curtailed, as we see. The Irish government can no longer make decisions on the basis of moral values, or protecting the poor, or the common good. Political freedom means little within a totalitarian economy. International investors are our masters, and we are their slaves. When slavery was legal, the most astute slave masters kept their slaves happy. The risk of rebellion was thus reduced, and their status as slave masters was therefore less likely to be threatened. In the global plantation in which we live, we are persuaded that if we wish to maintain our standard of living, we have to accept our slave masters. If we rebel, we lose our flat-screen TVs, our foreign holidays, our detached homes, as we are discovering. Hence, the decisions our government are now making are focused on returning some of us, as quickly as possible, to our previous status of contented slaves. Our government are the overseers, slaves themselves, but slaves trusted to meet the needs of the masters. After each economic decision they make, they immediately look over their shoulders to see how the international investors are reacting. If they're happy, the government is happy. Of course, every 5 years we get to choose the overseers who will control us. But if we choose overseers who are not playing the master's game, as in Greece, then we will all be punished severely. However, some of the slaves who had accumulated enough money to buy their freedom began to behave like the masters and got greedy. They borrowed more and more of their former master's money until eventually they were unable to repay it. The masters were incensed and demanded that all the slaves should be punished and made to work harder to repay what was owed. Those former slaves who had abused their freedom were banished to Florida and other places in the sun, with enough money to allow them plenty of time to reflect on their misdeeds. The poor, the unemployed, and the homeless are the inevitable collateral damage of this global economic model. But we are persuaded that there is no alternative. To challenge the economic model is to alienate those international investors on whom our comforts depend. Freedom or comfort, that is our choice. The economic system will not let us have both. Such an economic model is not valueless. It must actually promote certain values in order to succeed. A consumer-led economic model that pursues profit for one sector of the world's population must convince everyone, or at least as many as possible, that it is in their interests to participate in this process. I would identify three core needs which have been manipulated by the economic model to impose values that are essential to the economy but destructive of us as human beings. First, we all desire happiness and fulfillment. To ensure the continued expansion of the economy, we have to be persuaded to buy more and more, and to buy more and more often. But as our real needs are limited, what we purchase and consume has less and less relationship to what we actually need. Hence, a consumer-led economic model has to convince us to want more and more by persuading us that our fulfillment and happiness lies in acquiring and consuming goods and services. More is better is the mantra of such an economic model, with its variations such as bigger is better or newer is better. The irony, of course, is that having persuaded us to purchase goods and services in the pursuit of happiness, it is necessary that we become fairly quickly dissatisfied with what we have just purchased, so that we are driven to go out and purchase again. We are running up an escalator that is travelling in the opposite direction in the unachievable aim of arriving at the top. Worse still, it seeks to persuade us that our value as persons is dependent on our ability to purchase more and bigger and newer. The large house, the brand name car, the latest gadgets, more foreign holidays. It seeks therefore to persuade us that our needs can be fulfilled independently of other people. Indeed, to ensure continued satisfaction and fulfillment in our lives, we must protect our consumer goods from other people. We must keep others out, or at least we must control whom we let in. Otherwise, our fulfillment and happiness may be jeopardized. Secondly, we all have a fundamental need for security. To ensure the continued expansion of the economic system, we must be persuaded that our security is to be found in what we possess. We have to work hard within the system in order to obtain more so that we can cushion ourselves and our families from the uncertainties of the future. Purchasing our own home, building up our bank balance, expanding our shareholdings are essential to escape from the insecurity which the future threatens us with. They are essential above all for the security of our children. Hence, we are trapped within the system. To fail to play the game is to risk ruin for ourselves and for our families. And thirdly, we all have a fundamental desire to belong. However, this economic model necessarily pursues an excessive individualism. As the goods and services of this world are limited, we are all pushed into a competitive struggle with other human beings to accumulate the material benefits which we are promised guarantee our security and happiness. Others become not the source of our fulfillment, but a threat to that fulfillment. Community becomes an optional extra for those who feel inclined, as we rush to find security and fulfillment in what we, as individuals or as families, can accumulate. Margaret Thatcher's famous "there's no such thing as society" is the logical consequence of such a model. And the ultimate triumph of this economic model is that it has succeeded in persuading us that there is no alternative. Now, I'm not competent to spell out an alternative. That's TASC's job. So I can only dream. And so I dream of an economic model based not on the myth of infinite growth capitalism, but based on limited but sustainable growth. An economic model that seriously questions the limits of growth and searches for sustainable models of growth. The mantra of the old economic model, more is better, must give way to moderation and restraint. We can return to full employment, but not at the current standard of living which is currently available to some. We can give all those living in poverty a decent quality of life, but not while most of us in the Western world enjoy the standard of living which we have come to take for granted. The ethics of a new economic model must be based on the inherent value of each individual and must involve not only a more just sharing a more just sharing of the wealth created, but a more just sharing of power. Of course, for the global economy to revive, there must be a real demand for new goods and services, a demand that will create investment opportunities, but not a demand for superfluous goods and services like Gucci handbags, which creates an economy that primarily benefits those who can afford them. No, the goods and services that create a new demand, which can fuel a new economic model, must be goods and services that are necessary and enduring. Goods and services which seeks to lift everyone out of poverty and marginalization. Where the old economic model emphasized the individual, the new economic model must ensure that everyone benefits. It must therefore be built on the value of solidarity. Perhaps the only times in history when such a solidarity existed, within and between nations, were those times when war was waged or threatened, as we have seen not only in the past, but even in more recent times. At such times, there was a common purpose, a common commitment, and a universal willingness to sacrifice self-interest for the greater good. Today, to move into a new world, a world that promises a better life for all, and a real hope for a better future, we need a new war. A war on poverty, at home and abroad, and a war on climate change. A war on poverty would create a demand for investment in producing basic needs for all, adequate housing, food, medicines, infrastructure, health and education. A war on climate change would create a demand for non-fossil fuel transport, for clean energy, for public transport. Such a war requires a solidarity that unfortunately no longer exists in Ireland or indeed elsewhere. It was almost destroyed by the Celtic Tiger. It requires a sacrifice of self-interested short-term gains, which on the national level is willing to put future generations and the poor in first place, and on the international level is willing to dismantle barriers to free trade set up by rich countries to protect their own interests, to dismantle barriers to the free movement of labour with the same enthusiasm as they dismantled barriers to the free movement of capital. Such an economic model would consider justice, compassion, community, and ecological responsibility not as afterthoughts, but as points of departure for economic life. Such an economic model would seriously reduce the living standards of most of us in the economically developed world, but would allow those now living in poverty, both at home and abroad, to find a better quality of life, and would bequeath the world to future generations that they could actually live in. Such a vision is anathema to the vision which our economic system has so successfully built. Solidarity instead of individuality, putting others first instead of self-interest, living simply instead of an endless pursuit of yet higher and higher living standards. Such an economic model may seem like an unrealizable pipe dream, but it is actually essential for the survival of the planet. To continue with the same old economic model with the same values will destroy the human race, either through the destruction of the planet or through social conflict. We cannot build a new economic model on an old political model. A transformed economic model requires a transformed political model, a transformation of leadership. Political leadership which does not bow to powerful vested interest groups, which does not seek their own good at the expense of the good of others, which is not self-serving but seeks to serve the common good, which gives rightful place to other values beyond mere economic growth, values such as solidarity, community, and respect for the dignity of others. Such a transformed political leadership seeks to build security for our country and our world, not through unsustainable economic growth, but through building sustainable community. And so I dream on. At the heart of a new economic and political model is the concept of solidarity. We will never eliminate homelessness and poverty in Irish society or in our world, as long as we see homeless people and poor people as outside objects in need of our compassion. We will only solve homelessness and poverty when we see homeless and poor people as part of ourselves, and we as part of them. We are one people and one community. Reaching out to those who are homeless, poor, and marginalised is not an act of charity. It is a demand of justice. A shared sense of solidarity, the solidarity that acknowledges the dignity of every human being, a solidarity that feels the pain of others as our pain, that sees the desires and hopes of others as our desires and hopes, is the fundamental requirement for building a more just society. Thank you very much.
David Norris is my name, and I'd like first of all to compliment Father McVerry on his wonderful speech. I'm delighted to find somebody at last who agrees with me about a number of things, such as the fact that capitalism is banjaxed. You know, I remember saying when communism fell, there was a lot of glee about it, that although it was imperfect, we should be ordering our mourning bands for capitalism subsequently, because it is based on, as I said at the time, and you said this evening, Father, a completely unsustainable premise, that of an infinitely expanding market on a finite planet. It is unsustainable. And by the way, I did put as many of the bondholders' names as I could on the record before the Cahill practically smashed his hammer on the gong and suspended the Senate for half an hour. But a lot of them hid under corporations, and we were told an awful lot of lies, like that our pension funds depended on, but didn't. I traced one of them, who was the son of a Greek shopping billionaire, shipping billionaire, but shopping billionaire is more the same thing. But my question is this, and I will come to an end, because other people I'm sure want to get in. You mentioned so many things that I feel strongly about, except population. And to me, this is another critical disaster. And every year I attend the UN release of the report on global population. The one word that is never mentioned is population. Female genital mutilation, civilian casualties, education, never population. That is the elephant in the room. When I went to Trinity, the population was 3 billion. It's now 7 billion, and it's climbing to 9. And it's one thing for which I cannot be held personally responsible by the media. So I wonder if you have any comment on that. But congratulations, and thank God there are people of conscience and spirit who live out by their lives the gospel message.
My question is, do you think now that more power has gone to Europe since the referendum, that the needs of the underprivileged and the homeless in Ireland can be ignored even more easily in the future.
The planet can sustain a greater population than 7 million if it was only a fairer redistribution of wealth and a fairer redistribution of population. So I think that certainly we can feed more than 7 billion people if we had that as our objective. But I take your point that if an unending consumer capitalism cannot be sustained, and an increasing population forever cannot be sustained either. But it's not an issue that I've done any reflection or thought about. In terms of Europe, I don't think anybody really wants people to be poor or to be marginalised, but I think there's an ideology that says, well, this is just the inevitable consequences of economic growth. You know, homelessness, it's just there are casualties in this economic drive, and unfortunately homeless people are one of those casualties. We wish it wasn't the way, but it's inevitable. There is that sense of, in that ideology, that liberal ideology, a sense that these are the inevitable casualties of a world that is moving forward, and I would question that. And I would certainly challenge that very strongly. I think that in the European model, again, I'm not a politician, I'm not an economist, but I don't think Ireland counts. I don't think Greece counts. I think the European model is there primarily, certainly benefiting the larger countries like Germany and France. And I think we're only pawns in the game. So I think that runs right through the economic model. Those wealthier countries are the ones who have most to benefit. Those wealthier corporations are the ones that are most to benefit, and those wealthier individuals are the ones who have most to benefit, and they're the ones who call the shots and make the decisions. And so I think, yes, Ireland and the poor within Ireland will continue to be more and more marginalised within the current economic model.
Point that we have an awful lot, we have given away an awful lot, but we have an awful lot still. It's the decision making, how we spend our money as a country. And we have never taken seriously the fact that if a country is good for everybody, it's good for everybody. So, you know, people will argue that we haven't got the money. We have enough money to do things. It's just the way we are willing to spend it. We had huge tax cuts in the 1990s, which were disastrous. And we have never really seen tax as a positive in this country. And until we see tax as a positive, we'll get nowhere, regardless of what economic system we have. The other thing is, we have never seen investment in our people as our fundamental duty.
In your dream, and I think it's a dream a lot of people have, right? You mentioned the idea of the structures and the need for those to change, both political, economic models, as part of maybe bringing that dream to a reality. You mentioned the phrase yourself, pawn in the game, and therefore change you've recognised as being something that's very incremental as part of that. And therefore, I suppose that brings to light the idea of TASC and claiming our future, and other groups of people who are trying to, at this point in time, because of the fact we're in the transition and that flux of change. Now, how in fact that will occur, I'm not too sure, but I'm just hoping, in terms of what's happening currently, both by being here tonight and hearing what you're saying and knowing that in fact there are people thinking seriously about the need to change the structures. The question then, in fact, is the idea that leadership within those existing structures and the leadership within the new structures that are trying to emerge, how do you see that as coming to the fore? Because it's only from the top, given the fact that the top controls the vision, that the bottom will change. And therefore we need some sort of a cultural mindset change in terms of the current leaders. In what way, through places like TASC, organisations like TASC, and claiming the future, in what way are maybe reforming the whole area of local government as a basis for that change? And there's the way I see it, because one can have a dream, but one has to have practicalities about how you nail it to a particular reality, and knowing that in doing it, that within the generation that you live, you will only change so much.
First of all, respect. to the Father in your name. In the recent census, the returns showed that approximately 90% of citizens of this republic declared themselves Christian. And what I want to ask you about is your sense, and based on experience, of why it is that time after time we vote in a pusillanimous manner. That even though most of what you said would be accepted by our citizens, at the next general election we will lack the courage to aver those values in our choices. And it's significant that the constituencies that voted no, and I'm happy to say I was in one of them in Dublin South Central, and I would like to add just a little note that even the most extreme analysts would say that we should have voted no because the system has actually failed, and there is huge denial about that failure because it's controlled, as you so eloquently said, by a certain cohort, the 1% in short. But to finish, and just to repeat my question, because I'm fascinated by your sense of it, is why do a people like the Irish, who are very morally courageous, who are generous, not see the analysis and make the choice when they have the ballot in their hands?
Be quite similar. Changing the structures of society presupposes changing the values in a society. If you change the structures without changing the values, you don't go anywhere. You can change the structure, but they'll revert back again. So I think the fundamental change that we have to do is changing the values in society. Now, I think the economic model, as I said, has very successfully imposed certain values on us. And one of the values is that individualism. And for many people, escaping out of the insecurity which the future might hold means getting up there to the top as an individual, climbing that ladder, getting up there where you are immune from the economic difficulties that might affect the population. Whereas I think those in the middle, what we might call the middle class, I think their interests really lie with the poor, because they are being screwed the same way as the poor are being screwed. But instead of trying to get up there where the rich are, I think they should be combining with the poor to try and change the structures and the values of society that would be in everybody's interests. So I think we have been seduced by the economy. Now, changing values is where the churches come in. That's their job, primarily, is challenging the values of our society. And I think our churches have lost their way. I think our churches have themselves been seduced by power and wealth and have focused us, and I can understand why, but have focused us on trying to get to heaven and diverted our attention away from what's happening here on earth. And I think Jesus, as my reading of the Gospels, Jesus was really not particularly interested in how we get to heaven. Jesus was interested in building a community here on earth, a community that would reflect the values of the kingdom of God. And that is a community of solidarity and a community of radical inclusiveness. I don't understand why the church during the Celtic Tiger years was not screaming from the rooftops about the obscenity of homelessness, and we had more money than we knew what to do with. And why the church isn't screaming from the rooftops about the obscenity of Moyross and Dolphin's Barn. I can't understand that. Because the church, if it's about anything, it's about the dignity of each and every single human being as a child of God. And where that dignity is undermined by the way society treats people, then the church should be the first in there screaming, as I say, from the rooftops. So I think the church has to re-find its way. It has to reimagine itself. Get back to the gospel, it seems to me, as I read the gospel. Get back to the real gospel values. And the church, therefore, could be, and I hope will eventually one day, be the institution which challenges the values that are dominant in our society. I think we have a long way to go, but that would be my hope. The first speaker, how do we elect? Yeah, we elect the same people, and we elect them because the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know, and we're scared. And we're scared, we want to get up there, and so the thing is to use the system as best we can in order to maximise what we can get out of the system, and the best way to do that is to keep the people that we know and are comfortable with running the system. And we, as the first person said, yes, we are still a very wealthy country. But as Vincent Brown would constantly say, the wealth is very skewed. There are an awful lot of very wealthy people in this country. I don't understand why we can't up the tax rate to 50% or something. It just baffles me. But I think my parable of the view from the top and the view from the bottom might come into play here. But we have the money to give everybody in this country a decent standard of living if we were to if we had that sense of solidarity. It's interesting that the government only started using the word solidarity when the recession came. It never used the word solidarity during the Celtic Tiger years. And solidarity came to mean that the poor must carry their share of the burden of getting out of this mess that we're in. And that's a perversion of the meaning of solidarity. Meaning of solidarity is those who are better off, those who can afford it, those who are in a better position should be carrying the burden of those who are worse off. That's the meaning of solidarity, not the other way around.
Pagan, most people know him from the collapse of St. Michael's Estate in Chicago, and really what you've spoken here is always what you do, Peter. But I think our reality at the moment is very, very hard in terms of communities, because the heart at the moment is being ripped out of all our communities throughout Ireland in terms of working class or rural or those. There's decisions being made that are real choices about cutting back. They've cut combat poverty so you don't get to hear about the poverty now. They've cut the equality authority and the human rights so you're not getting to hear about the human rights, or that they've taken the community development programme out of the communities. Now what they're acting on is the national drug strategy. At the moment, there's 8 communities in Dublin, in Tallaght, Clondalk and Ballyfermot, St. Michael's Estate, Dolphin House and Fatima Mansions, communities that struggle really hard. They're losing 11.5 jobs at the moment, which have been cut 50% just by Phil Hogan, just for a piece of the pen. Phil here is one of those people that's losing a job. Those that are woke with people that are the out and outs, that people who are now being abandoned in our communities, people who just live on the edge. So the society that we have here and that we are creating is a wrong society. It's a society that if we let go and let it go, that nobody will be cared about, and in time to come we're going to have to put back in those money. So those of us, our leaders, have to stand up, defend, fight and do whatever we can and have the courage to do so. And I ask, because we're going to be, we're waiting for this decision from Phil Hogan and from Gilmore, we're waiting for this to come through, and we will need the help to defend those spaces. And you saw the other day in Dolphin House, the sewage comes up through the baths. You can't take the resource, the capacity builders or those who work with those people out of those communities. It's wrong, it's wrong, it's wrong.
Some people mentioned earlier on about claiming our future, and in claiming our future, that is an attempt where people are trying to come together to really re-examine the values base of society, and to use your word, Fatma McVerry, to envision again a society which is based on values that everybody can feel comfortable with and can espouse, like equality and like participation, solidarity, sustainability. And one of the issues that in some of our groups at Claiming Our Future we're studying at the moment is the issue of income inequality, because it's really very crucial to, I think, the feeling that people have in society of injustice and of malaise. When you look at the disparities in income in Ireland, it's not true to say we're a bankrupt society. Far from it. It's something that government ministers use every now and again. It's not the society that's bankrupt. If you look at income ratios in the 1960s, say, you would find that the difference between the director of the Bank of Ireland and the lowest earning people on minimum wage was something, a ratio, maybe like 10, 15 to 1, something like that. I'm making it up because I don't really know what the figure is. But if you look at the income ratios now between the people at the top of banks, top of industry and such like, and the wealthiest individuals, it's grotesque. It's like 4,000 to 1. Again, I'm making it up, but it's of that order. And I think that's, we need more information about things like that, because most people, I think, perhaps the voters, are not particularly ideological, not particularly, attracted to a system or an ism or an ology. But when people see that things have got very grotesque in Ireland between the top and the bottom, the money is there. And we need to pay for, for services for people that citizens require and need in society. So, anyway, work is going on in organisations like Claiming Our Future, so I'd encourage everybody to get stuck in.
I work in the charity sector, and I work quite a bit with social housing. And I wonder if there anything we can do to learn lessons. There are vacant houses deteriorating all over the country in places where there are no people and probably never will be and will be eventually demolished. The figure of homeless is growing at an alarming rate. There are hardly any suitable houses being built for the last 2 years. And this problem is not going to stay the same or improve, it's going to get worse. And panic will hit in a couple of years' time when they realise the housing isn't there. Is there any way that minds can be put together to start building some form of suitable social housing now and not let the problem escalate? Because it's happening, and it will happen.
Hi, my name's Desmond O'Toole. I'm a member of the Labour Party and also of the Party of the European Socialists. It's not something I laugh about, my friend. Rural Ireland lifted out of poverty, the industrialisation of this country, rights for women, rights for people at work, environmental protections, clean water, all of this has come from the European Union. And I think when we talk about the European Union, we need to remember some of those things. And we also need to remind ourselves that thinking about the European Union in a one-dimensional sense, that it is the source of all of our ills, doesn't help us help this country at all. So that's just, I think, just a general comment. You gave quite a lot of criticisms of the current system, criticisms, Peter, which I think all of us could agree with, and your track record on addressing those, you're not just someone who talks about it, you're someone who does social justice. But I was particularly interested in the alternatives that you offered. And one of the more concrete comments you made was about reducing everybody's standard of living in order to raise the standard of living of the poorest here at home and also around the world. But I'd like to offer another, perhaps, an alternative, and it's referencing something that one of our friends said over here. There are countries in the world that are able to deliver a sustainable economic performance, security for their people, low levels of poverty, high levels of income and economic security, and high levels of equality in their societies. Without mentioning them individually, I think we can all guess who I'm talking about. Perhaps rather than asking for everybody's standard of living to be reduced in order to raise the standard of living of the poorest, perhaps what we might be asking for is European levels of taxation, in Ireland in particular, if we want European levels of public service. And perhaps that is a route that you might want to comment on. Thank you.
Start at the end. We are a very, very low tax economy. I would love to see us, and I think the argument has been put forward many times that we ought to at least get up there in the middle of the European tax level, never mind get up to the Scandinavian countries' level of taxation. The difference between Scandinavian countries and the rest of Europe is the value system. They take this for granted. They presume that this is the way things ought to be in their society, whereas there would probably be outright rebellion here if we try to increase tax rates to the level of those countries. Even that doesn't, and they do have excellent services and they have much greater equality and all that, yes. But it still doesn't address the problem of 1 billion people on our planet who are living on the edge of destitution. And economic growth, as I say, cannot lift them out of that poverty without destroying our planet. And the only way they can be lifted out of that is if we were to share some of what we have with them. And sharing, it's a zero-sum game. If we share what we have to share to enable them to have a decent standard of living, then our standard of living is going to go down. Now, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think our expectations have grown and grown and grown. And that's part of the pressure that the economic model gives us. I remember when I was growing up, there were only two kinds of televisions. There was a 14-inch black and white, and for rich people they had a 17-inch black and white. And I was very happy with our little 14-inch black and white. And then I went to England on a holiday with my parents, and I saw a colour television. And I came back and I said, get rid of that. How can you watch television in black and white? And so then everybody had a colour television. And then the television screens got bigger and bigger and bigger. Who has a 21-inch television screen in their sitting room today? And then HD television came in. Wonder how many people here have a HD television? And in a few years' time, we'll all be wondering, how did we ever survive without 3D television? So our expectations just grow and grow and grow, and the standard of living that we take for granted gets higher and higher and higher. I think we have to start living much more simply, and allowing in living much more simply, then we are in a position to share with those who need us. In terms of the housing, the flaw in the housing model. The flaw in the homeless model now is housing first. Put people into homes and then put the services, like addiction services, mental health services, or whatever, in to help them. The old model was many homeless people have an addiction, they have mental health problems, they have behaviour problems. Let them go and solve their problems and then come back and we'll house them. And of course that couldn't work. It didn't work. And it couldn't work. How do you solve your addiction problem in hostels which are full of drugs? How do you solve your mental health problem if you're walking the streets all day? So the new model, housing first, put people into homes, and then provide the services. It makes sense. Theoretically, of course it makes sense. And in practice it works. It's worked in New York, it's worked in Toronto, it's worked in parts of Britain. But the flaw in it is that we had the government, the Housing Authority, Department of the Environment, who were ultimately responsible for this, had no control over the provision of housing. Social housing has ceased to be purchased or built. All social housing now, apart from the regeneration of Ballymun and Moyross and that, but all social housing now is going to be leased from the private sector. And the private sector aren't playing ball. So when you have a policy and you have no control over the primary ingredients into that policy, you don't have a policy, you have a dream. And so I think local authorities need to get back to ensuring that in whatever way, through buying or building, that they have control of the social housing stock so that they can use that to eliminate homelessness. Don't see that happening. Certainly not in the economic climate at present, but theoretically and fundamentally, it seems to me that's the only way we can eliminate homelessness. Yes, we're a very unequal society, and yeah, what more can I say? It's a very unequal. And community. You know, the future is in community. It's in community that we find our happiness. We all want to belong. And the sad thing today is that so many young people particularly don't feel any sense of belonging. I have no doubt that that must contribute to the growing suicide rate. They just don't feel they belong anywhere. A building community is it gives us our source of happiness and fulfillment, and it gives us our security. If the whole community are working together, then in good times the community supports everyone, and in bad times the community rallies around everyone. So the future lies in building community, and as you say, we're in the process of dismantling community. We began in the Celtic Tiger, community became an optional extra, as I say, for those who wanted it. And at the moment, we're destroying those community projects which give life and hope to communities. We're going in the wrong direction.
I'd like you to join with me in thanking Father Peter McVerry for his talk tonight, showing us that there very clearly is an alternative and pointing very much strongly in the direction that we should be going in.